Welcome to the public statement hearing, Bluebird Renewable Energy Section 68, Case 21-D-0576. Your line is muted upon entry. The hearing will begin shortly. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to get started. Our court reporter for this afternoon will be Mr. Howard Hubbard. Mr. Hubbard, are you ready to proceed?
I am. We are on the record.
Okay, great. I call case 21-G-0576, petition of Bluebird Renewable Energy LLC for an original certificate of public convenience and necessity and establishing a lightened regulatory regime. And good afternoon, my name is James Costello. I am an administrative law judge with the Department of Public Service, and I've been assigned to preside over this public statement hearing. Xenia Vega, and Jill Weiser from the Department's Office of Consumer Affairs are also on the line and will be providing technical assistance. This public statement hearing was noticed on January 7th, 2022, and on November 24th, 2021, Bluebird Renewable filed a petition with the Public Service Commission seeking a certificate of public convenience and necessity and a lightened regulatory regime. If granted, the certificate would authorize Bluebird to construct, own, and operate a renewable natural gas project in Cayuga County, New York. The project would consist of facilities for the processing and transportation of biogas from anaerobic digesters located at the Aurora Ridge Dairy and Sunnyside Farm to a processing facility located at the Sunnyside Farm. The processed gas will be compressed for loading into United States Department of Transportation approved carbon fiber tube trailers and trucked to a receipt point where it will be injected into an interstate pipeline, which Bluebird currently anticipates will be the Corning Natural Gas Corporation system near Caton, New York. The project will include the construction of two pipelines. One pipeline, approximately 5.5 miles in length, will run from the anaerobic digesters at the Aurora Ridge Dairy to the Sunnyside Farm processing facility and cross publicly owned rights-of-way in the towns of Ledyard and Venice in Cayuga County. The second pipeline, approximately 1,500 feet in length, will transport raw biogas from the Sunnyside Farms digester to the processing facility. And the processing facility will consist of systems that will purify, compress, meter, and ensure the quality of the processed gas. This public statement hearing is being held to receive public comments on whether the Commission should grant a certificate of public convenience and necessity, and whether the Public Service Commission should find that the proposed facility is entitled to lightened regulation. Before going over the process that we're going to follow this afternoon, I want to acknowledge that we have three commissioners that are attending this public statement hearing. They are Commissioners Diane Berman, David Valesky, and John Majori. And I'd ask Commissioner Berman if you would like to address the attendees.
Thank you so much, Judge. I'm happy to be here virtually. My role with my fellow commissioners is to be a listener. I intend to do that. I'm happy to be a part of the public statement hearing in this role. I think it's very valuable, and I look forward to folks' comments. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. Commissioner Valesky, would you like to make a comment?
Thank you very much, Judge Costello. I'd be happy to do that. I am pleased to participate in this public statement hearing. I see that we have already over 40 participants. That's very, very important. I want to assure everyone who's listening, who will be speaking today, that public opinion is critically important as we, the members of the Commission, deliberate over petitions that come before us. So I want to thank each and every member of the public who's participating this afternoon, and I look forward to listening today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Valesky. And Commissioner Majori, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Judge Costello. I would echo the comments of my colleagues, Commissioners Berman and Valesky, in thanking everyone who has shown up virtually to participate in this. And as they have indicated, I too am here to listen and look forward to everyone's comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. So turning to today's process, I just want to let everyone know that this is not any type of an evidentiary hearing, but rather just an opportunity for public comment and for the public to offer their comments on the petition filed by Bluebird Renewable Energy. The statements that are made today will become part of the administrative record. As I stated, we have a court reporter on the line who will be preparing a transcript of this hearing, which will be publicly available on the Department of Public Services website. And this is not the only opportunity that you have for comments. If you did not pre-register to speak, you can submit comments via the department's website, by email, by regular mail, or by telephone. And all comments, however submitted, will be given equal consideration. And the information for submitting comments by those methods is contained in the January 7th notice that was issued in this case. For the record, this public statement hearing is being held virtually. And if you are going to be speaking, we just want to make sure that you use only one audio input and one audio output at your end. Otherwise, we may experience some problems with feedback when you're speaking. What I will be doing is I will call the individuals who have registered to speak one by one. If someone is not available when I call them, I will move on to the next person and then come back to anyone who is not available after I've gone through the list of people that have registered. For people who are participating electronically, We'll unmute your line after we call your name. You should hear a tone and see that the microphone icon on your screen is no longer red. And we please ask you again, if you have muted the line on your end, you'll have to unmute that before you begin to speak. For those people who would be participating by telephone, when I call out your name, I will ask you to please press *3 on your telephone so we can recognize you and unmute your line. Please be reminded that if you have muted yourself on your end, you'll have to unmute yourself. And after you've provided your statement, I may ask you again to press *3 so we can more easily locate the next phone participant. When your line is unmuted, I ask that you state and spell your name, and if you're speaking on behalf of an organization, the name of the organization. And once I confirm that we can hear you, you can proceed to make your comments. Remember to speak slowly and clearly so that the court reporter can accurately capture your statements for the record. So with that, we're going to go to our first speaker, who is Jerry Wiley. Just give us a moment so we can locate you. It looks like you've been unmuted, Mr. Or Jerry Wiley. Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, just spell your name for the court reporter, and then you can begin with your statements.
Yes, my name is spelled Jerry, Gerri, Wiley, Wiley.
Okay, thank you. You may give your comment.
Okay, thank you. Yes, my name is Jerry Wiley, and thank you, Judge Costello and commissioners, for holding this hearing. We ask, how can we reduce greenhouse gas emissions from cows and cow manure? And what we do is come up with solutions such as change the bovine nutrition to produce less methane. We administer an anti-methane vaccine. We consider deploying manure covers. We operate anaerobic digesters and use renewable natural gas to power the farm. Or we process, transport, and compress the RNG and truck it to a site where it can be injected into a natural gas pipeline, as in this case. These are all expensive and sometimes dangerous solutions, particularly the practice of trucking compressed natural gas. And yet, as in the practice of medicine, we often treat symptoms and not the root cause. And the root cause of the dairy-related methane emissions is the abundance of cows, 625,000 in New York State. So why do we have an abundance of cows? Because the nutrition science and climate science exist in their own silos, to use an agricultural term. There's clear and abundant evidence that cow's milk, while serving the nutritional needs of calves, is detrimental to human health. If it were not for the powerful dairy industry controlling the actions of medical and nutrition boards, this truth would be widespread. But people aren't naive. They learn through experience that cow's milk protein can make their infants lose blood in their stool, and that lactose intolerance creates digestive issues and is quite prevalent, particularly among minority groups. Even before Cornell's T. Colin Campbell wrote the China study and found cancer cells could be turned off and on like a light switch with the introduction of or withdrawal of casein, the cow's milk protein, people were figuring out they feel better and their health is more optimal with dairy alternatives. Thus, they're literally not buying it. Milk alternatives are flying off supermarket shelves, and meanwhile, we continue to bail out dairy farmers, change the cow feed composition, and try to make bovine excrement profitable. I'm a public health nurse. I should not have had to solve complex nutritional issues with my WIC, Women, Infants, and Children's clients each and every day of my public health nursing career. Nor should the many people suffering from cow's milk issues be encouraged to find senseless ways of tolerating a product that doesn't serve to maximize their high-level wellness. After gathering the data and synthesizing the collective unsiloed evidence, the real question becomes, why are we harming both human health and climate stability by perpetuating the propaganda of milk, it does the body good? RNG is a false solution to a wrong-headed question. The business of dairy farming itself is not a public necessity and not in the public interest. Therefore, it follows that greenhouse gas emissions need not be addressed if the root of the problem is solved. So let's get to the root of the problem, and I do urge you to deny Bluebird Renewable Energy's RNG project. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Gail Pisha. And it looks like your line has been unmuted.
You can hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Your Honor, and thank you for being here, Commissioners. My name is Gail, G-A-L-E, Pisha, P as in Patrick, I-S-H-A, and I live in Nanuet, New York. The proposed project is not in the public interest because it will increase greenhouse gas emissions in New York State rather than reduce them as claimed by Bluebird. Therefore, it cannot comply with the emissions reduction goals set by the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Raising livestock accounts for 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and much of that is from cattle, since each cow produces 220 pounds of methane per year. Aurora Ridge Dairy has 2,000 head, while Sunnyside Farms milks 4,900 head and raises 3,900 head of young stock. Currently, the two dairies mitigate some of the climate impacts of all that methane by using anaerobic digesters to produce biogas to generate electricity that's used on site. This practice helps displace fossil fuel use because the farms would otherwise use electricity from the grid, which is currently still generated using some fossil fuel. However, the proposed project would collect that biogas, scrub and purify it into pipeline quality RNG, then compress it and load it into tube trailers for transportation to a place where it would be injected to the interstate pipeline. If there are any problems with the scrubbers, the biogas would be flared. When Bluebird claims in its petition that its biogas product will displace an equivalent amount of fossil fuel, it neglects to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions resulting from all the additional energy spent to collect, scrub, process, compress, and transport the RNG to its injection point. In addition, operation of the project would require electricity from the grid, as well as adding the two dairies back onto the grid, since they would no longer be generating their own electricity on site. Both actions will increase the fossil fuel generation and greenhouse gas emissions from the grid. This project cannot comply with CLCPA because of the net increase in greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore it is not in the public interest. Our state should be subsidizing the current, more efficient use of the biogas on site by farms, assuming I'm with the last speaker that these farms need to exist at all. So they won't have an economic incentive to sell the biogas for this kind of wasteful proposal that Bluebird is proposing. The United Nations report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released last August, warns that we have to drastically cut our greenhouse gas emissions immediately if we're to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. RNG is not a long-term compliance strategy under CLCPA, and the PSC must not allow this project to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Josh Berman. And your phone line has been unmuted.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great.
You may just spell your name and then give your statement, please.
Thank you. Sorry, it's just me. Maybe the computer. I'm getting feedback. My name is Josh Berman, Joshberman. Thank you for the opportunity to provide these comments.
I think we lost him.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just continue on, and then when if we see that he comes on, we'll return to Mr. Berman. So the next speaker would be Valdi Wiederpass.
Me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Valdi Wiederpass. First name is V as in Victor, A-L, D as in David, I. Last name is Wiederpass, W-E-I, D as in David, E, R as in Roger, P as in Peter, A, S as in Sam, S as in Sam. And I live at, well, in Endicott, New York. Zip code here is 13760. Thank you to Judge Costello and to the commissioners for allowing us this opportunity to give public comment into the official record. And I want to let you know that I have been researching the climate change, which is actually a climate crisis or climate emergency. If you read enough, it's actually an emergency. I've been studying this now for well over a decade, and I am frankly alarmed that this proposal is even being considered. I know that you have to consider this, but this is an obvious move by a company that wants to profit by going in the wrong direction. Using a biodigester to produce renewable natural gas from the cow excrement, cow manure, that's fine. And using it on site is appropriate to produce electricity to help offset the needs of the farm itself. And if you have extra, putting that onto the grid makes sense. But to now build pipelines to transport this gas and then spend more energy to try to process it, and as a previous commenter said, during the processing, if something goes wrong, they might end up flaring the gas. And then the other thing that must be mentioned too is that this gas, no matter how you produce it, whether it comes from the fracking fields of Pennsylvania or other states, or whether it gets produced from biodigesters from farms in New York State, the main component of it is methane, which is 85 times as bad as CO2 when it gets emitted into the atmosphere. And the risk of fugitive emissions from this complicated process that's being proposed by this company called this Bluebird proposal, which, I mean, it's a very nice sounding name, but what they're talking about doing is not nice at all. Risks many more fugitive emissions than doing this biodigester processing on site, where you convert it directly into electricity and then actually use it or put it onto the grid on site. Transporting it by pipeline, compressing it, purifying it, that all involves extra fittings, extra valves, extra sources for fugitive emissions, which we know pipelines leak. This is building pipelines also risks the public with a chance for a fire and an explosion as well. And then on top of this, now they're talking about trucking this, compressing it to perhaps 3,000 to 5,000 pounds per square inch and putting it into fiber wound tube trailers. This is just unbelievable that we're still allowing this on New York State roads. When the permitting that was used by the federal government to allow this practice in the first place stipulated that these trailers must not leak if the truck has an accident. And we have already seen several accidents where these trucks have rolled over into ditches and then leaked so badly that you could hear it from thousands of feet away, and the first responders that show up are afraid to go near it, rightfully so, because there's a risk of a fire and or explosion. And I've seen video of this. So this is not something that is a potential thing. It's already happened. Luckily, the fire and explosion hasn't happened yet, but it's just a question of time. And to add this from New York State, allowing such a practice here for doing something that is not necessary, it's not in the public convenience or public need this proposal serves. This is just something that somebody wants to do for profit. And then to have it be stuck into a pipeline that then gets used for distribution to natural gas customers, that perpetuates the potential usage of the natural gas distribution system, which we're supposed to move away from with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that was passed 2.5 years ago. So there's multiple layers of onion here that is attempted to be asked for lightened regulatory rules. There's no justification for lightening the regulatory rules. The regulatory rules, particularly in transporting natural gas by truck, is already too light. They shouldn't even be allowed in the first place because they've proven that they aren't even living up to their permit in the first place that the DOT, the federal DOT, gave them. So I humbly request, with multiple reasons that I just laid out to you. My background is engineering, so I'm not a dummy. I know the big picture here, and the big picture here that they're asking to be approved is horrific potentially. And I haven't even talked about the climate change problem. That's bad too. And the farmers themselves, the cows themselves suffer stress. And that gets exacerbated by these heat waves in summertime. You know, the heat stress makes cows produce less milk. It also makes them more susceptible to disease. So it's in the farmer's best interest not to do this as well, because this contributes or would contribute more to climate change, whereas what they're doing now with the biodigesters and generating electricity on site, that does make sense, and that does help in the big picture of alleviating the harm that you know, the humanity is doing to the climate. So please deny this permit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Berman, your line was dropped, and we see you're back on, so you now have the opportunity to make your comment.
Thank you, Judge Costello, and my apologies. I was getting an echo before, and
oh, that's okay.
The mistake of trying to disconnect from the WebEx while staying on the phone. So my name is Josh Berman. That's Joshberman. I am a senior attorney with the Sierra Club, and am providing these oral comments on behalf of the Sierra Club. We'll also be filing written comments for the February 11th deadline. The Sierra Club is the nation's oldest and largest grassroots environmental organization with 50,000 members in New York State. The Sierra Club is deeply concerned about Bluebird's RNG proposal and believes it must be denied based on the submitted petition. First, Bluebird has failed to establish that issuance of a CPCN is in the public interest. Bluebird contends that its proposal will further New York's climate goals by reducing the release of methane and other pollutants into the atmosphere. However, Aurora Ridge Dairy and Sunnyside Farm already operate anaerobic digesters and use the biogas to produce on-site electricity. Through this technology, these farms already reduce the release of methane and other pollutants into the atmosphere. Bluebird has provided no emissions analysis showing that piping the biogas, processing it, compressing it, trucking it, reheating it, injecting it into the interstate gas pipeline system, and then combusting it as RNG would result in lower emissions. Indeed, many of these proposed additional steps risk significantly increasing emissions because they are highly energy intensive and introduce the possibility of methane leaks. Moreover, even if there were emission reductions associated with Bluebird's RNG proposal, Bluebird proposes to sell the environmental attributes of its RNG into an out-of-state low-carbon fuel program, either the federal RFS or the California LCFS. If Bluebird commodifies and sells these environmental attributes into one of these programs, any climate benefits will be properly accounted for in that program. It cannot be double counted as an additional climate benefit for New York. Second, the Commission must comply with its obligations under Section 7.2 of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act in reviewing Bluebird's petition. Section 7.2 requires the Commission to consider whether the petition is inconsistent with or would interfere with achievement of the CLCPA's emission mandates, and if so, to determine if it is nevertheless justified and adequately mitigated. Injecting RNG into the interstate pipeline system is not compatible with any long-term decarbonization strategy for New York, and the Commission should find Bluebird's proposal inconsistent with the CLCPA. Even very optimistic forecasts of RNG potential from American Gas Foundation find that it could replace at most 4 to 8% of New York's current gas consumption from buildings and power generation. In addition, there is no justification for Bluebird's proposal because, as previously noted, Bluebird has failed to substantiate any environmental benefit, and there are likely significant adverse environmental consequences to what it proposes. In closing, the Sierra Club strongly opposes Bluebird's petition, which is both wasteful and lacking in environmental justification. Sierra Club does acknowledge the real environmental economic problems dairies face in responsibly managing their waste. However, the solution is not to establish a precedent that encourages wasteful and energy-intensive practices simply to try and access funding from out-of-state low-carbon fuel programs. Rather, the state must address how it incentivizes and compensates the environmental benefits associated with on-site actions that minimize the greenhouse gas emissions associated with dairy farming. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Irene Weiser.
Hi, thank you. And thank you all for the opportunity to be here to speak today. My name is Irene Weiser, I-R-E-N-E-W-E-I-S-E-R. And I am the coordinator of Fossil Free Tompkins, a former council member from the town of Caroline, and a retired veterinarian. I am also registered as a party in this case. I want to say at the outset that I am not anti-farmer. I believe today's farmers operate under challenging financial circumstances while being asked to comply with an ever-expanding set of environmental expectations. I fully support those expectations. However, I believe the state's policies are conflicted as to supporting farmers in achieving them, and that at times the environmental policies are economically misaligned with the outcomes the state wants to achieve. And I believe this proceeding is an example of that. My hope is that this proceeding will serve as a springboard for policy reflection within the PSC and beyond. An application for a Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity requires that the Public Service Commission consider, among other things, whether the action is in the public interest. Foremost in my concerns is whether the proposed action serves the public interest with respect to greenhouse gas emission reductions. And as the previous speaker stated, Section 7.2 of the state's climate law requires that when making decisions, all state agencies must consider whether such decisions are inconsistent with or will interfere with the attainment of the statewide greenhouse gas emission limits. And if so, the agency must provide a detailed statement of justification as to why such limits and criteria may not be met and to identify alternatives or greenhouse gas mitigation measures to be required. The existing petition does not contain enough information to make a determination as to whether the proposed RNG project interferes with attainment of CLCPA goals. The petitioner indicates that they have filed an air facility registration with the DEC and requested a non-jurisdictional determination, yet those documents have not been provided to the docket. We request access to those documents. Further, the record is incomplete without a robust life cycle analysis that the petitioner has failed to provide. That analysis must compare the emissions of the current digester operations with the potential emissions of the RNG proposal. We emphasize that such life cycle analysis must be comprehensive so that it is inclusive of various ancillary benefits from the digester electricity making process. For example, including if heat from the electricity is used to heat the digester tank versus how the digester will be heated under the RNG proposal. Similarly, analysis of the RNG proposal must take into account the added energy inputs needed in the purification process, leakage rates from pipelines, both large and small, frequency of flaring, and of course, the impact from transportation of the RNG by truck. Further, how does the proposed action compare to best practices recommended by the New York State Department of Ag and Markets and to the recommendations of the Climate Actions Council draft scoping plan? Until such information is provided on the record, I suggest a proper ruling cannot even be made. Further, I urge that the analysis look at broader implications of the ruling. Historically, there has been a temptation to look at emissions from a single project in isolation and to say, tiny impact, not a concern. This can be said of virtually all sources of emissions. One car, tiny impact. But the transportation sector as a whole is obviously a very big impact. This application represents just one of dozens of anaerobic digesters in operation on dairy farms across the state, as well as digesters at municipal wastewater treatment systems statewide. The state must evaluate the implications of its analysis and ruling in light of potentially similar actions from the broader sector in which anaerobic digesters are used. In light of the paucity of information on the record at this point, I urge the Commission to consider a second public statement hearing when the record is complete so that the public is better able to provide meaningful comments. Finally, about the trucks. As, again, another speaker has already referenced, there have been multiple incidents of CNG truck rollovers in New York State and other parts of the Northeast. Apparently, the trailers have a high center of gravity. In several instances, the rollovers have resulted in leakage of methane, road closures for extended periods of several hours, and necessitating evacuation within a quarter to half-mile radius. The Federal Department of Transportation Pipelines and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration has issued safety recommendations that driver of these vehicles undergo special training and that trucks transporting such materials be equipped with electronic stabilizers to help prevent rollovers. I ask that those PHMSA recommendations be made requirements to protect the public interest. Further, I request that the transport company be required to conduct annual safety and evacuation planning with each municipality that the trucks will pass through. Thank you for consideration of these concerns and ensuring the public interest is protected in evaluation of this proposal. As it stands right now, my belief is that this proposal should be denied. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Marie McCrae. Okay, your line has been unmuted. Now you may have mute on your end as well, so you'd have to make sure you're unmuted.
I unmuted now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great, thank you. My name is Marie, M-A-R-I-E, M-C-R-A-E. Senator Dryden, sit on the advisory committee. Dryden. I want to make it
You're breaking up a little bit. I don't know if you can make that a little louder.
Not sure how to do that. Am I okay now?
Well, let me ask our court reporter, is that something, are you going to have trouble with the transcript on this?
I am having difficulty hearing her. She's cutting out.
Okay, do you want to try maybe call in by telephone?
No, but I can certainly submit.
Yeah, I'm sorry because you are cutting out. So you certainly can submit something in writing, and if you want to try to call back by telephone, the connection might be better that way, but however you want to proceed.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Robert Schachelski, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you for the time here to speak. I'm Robert Schachelski. It's CIE, SIELSKI. I oppose this proposal to transfer methane gas from anaerobic digesters on farms to interstate frac gas pipe to the interstate frac gas pipeline system. The goal of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions over time with the goal of reaching zero emissions by 2050. Any proposal to transfer methane gas, no matter what the source, to interstate fracked gas pipelines runs contrary to our goal of reducing emissions. Methane emissions, once released to the atmosphere, are 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide in retaining heat over the first 20 years of release. This is one of the foremost reasons why the use of methane gas must be limited in our state. The current proposal only encourages the use of methane and supports the fracked gas industry. Not only does the current proposal risk leakages along the 6-mile proposed pipeline, but also at the proposed compression station, as well as during the transportation of the gas by truck, and while reheating the gas during filtration, and also at the point of injection into the interstate gas pipeline. The proposal itself would permit the flaring of gas in the event there are problems with the system. This petition is contrary to the public good and should be denied. It is true that Europe has devised a solution of usage for methane by farms where electricity and heat are provided to the farms, locally to the farms and nearby villages. Of course, Europe does not have the CAFO-size farms that are involved here of 2,500 cows and 4,000 cows. We should also not be helping CAFO-size farms economically to be maintained in this state, as they are a danger to the environment in many other ways than the methane produced. I would recommend the state to further investigate means of local use of methane by farms to ensure their proper use and not to encourage the dissemination of methane. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mary Finneran. If you are calling in by telephone, you'd have to hit *3 so that we can identify you and unmute your line. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone. Okay, Mary Finneran, Mary Finneran, *3 if you are participating by phone. The next speaker would be Ann Finneran. And Ann Finneran, if you are on the line, you'd have to hit *3. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody. I'll come back to those two people at the end. Our next speaker is Reggie Teasley. And your line has been unmuted, and you may make your statement.
Okay, thank you. My name is Reggie, R-E-G-I, Teasley, T as in Tom. I live in Ithaca, New York. I'm a retired sociologist with a focus on political economy and the environment. I want to urge you to deny this permit. And I would ask, is it in the public interest? It's certainly not. And as a previous speaker mentioned, the so-called Bluebird Renewable Energy might better be called something like bird extinction promotion, since our increasingly heated environment is causing the death of substantial portion of wild birds. We have to really see the big picture here. It's so easy to lose in these focused conversations. But the farmers who have CAFOs, which we should not be supporting, looking for another way to make some money by creating and shipping biogas, indicates to me that our fundamental policies with regard to farming must be in error, and those need to be addressed. We should be supporting small farmers who are producing food, which we are going to need regionally sooner rather than later. Our climate is changing in ways that we already can't cope with, and adding the probability of methane leaks in the compressed natural gas is foolish in the extreme. We don't want trucks filled with methane driving down our already compromised roads and highways. As I recall, engineers typically give the infrastructure something like a D+. And, you know, I would ask, why would such an idea ever get traction in the first place? Is New York State actually serious about the CLCPA, or are agencies operating with separate agendas? I just want to remind you of the big picture here. I listened to a webinar today in which experts from India talked about policies in their country to deal with climate change, and also policies in the United States. And they certainly do not look to the United States for leadership. Instead, they see the United States largely as a problem worldwide. I think sometimes we forget that others do look to us, and that what we should be doing is leading with a laser focus on how to address the climate crisis. So I want to thank you for allowing me to speak, and I would urge you to deny this permit. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Brian Eden.
Brian, B-R-I-A-N, Eden, E-D-E-N, Village of Cayuga Heights. Thank you, Commissioners Berman and Valesky and Majori, for attending. Dear AJ Costello, I plan to dispense with my introductory remarks on the legal and technical issues that I have with this specific proposal, and will delve directly into the project itself. The project will further New York State's goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, so as set forth in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, by reducing the release of methane and other pollutants into the atmosphere. There is little data in the petition to support this assertion. The proponents are now utilizing the biogas on site, processing the biogas to RNG, piping it from one farm to the other, compressing, trucking, reheating, and injecting it into the pipeline will provide ample opportunities for additional methane leakage. A life cycle assessment is required to justify the public benefit on a greenhouse gas emission reduction basis. The Climate Action Council's Waste Advisory Panel recommended that for New York State, to ensure that biogas from the waste sector does not result in new gas transmission infrastructure, prioritize the on-site use of biogas. The panel further stated that biogas could play a role in environmentally sound waste disposal, but caution should be taken to avoid biogas use intentionally or inadvertently, leading to the extended use of fossil fuels. I also use CLCPA Section 7.2, which I will not reiterate here. Each agency shall provide a detailed statement of justification, and I don't see that here. And the administrative record is in this proceeding is incomplete in many aspects. The proponents asserts that the commission must determine whether the actions it is asked to approve could have a significant impact on the environment. Attached to this petition as Exhibit E is the full environmental impact assessment form. To to assist with the commission in conducting its environmental review. As described herein and demonstrated by the EAF, the proponents maintain, the project will not have any significant environmental impacts and therefore does not require an environmental impact statement. In previous PSC proceedings in which I have participated, the commission has demurred at delving deeply into the environmental impacts of a project, stating that such environmental reviews fall within the domain of the New York State DEC. The New York State DEC has entered nothing at all in this record, let alone on the critical environmental concern for the potentially negative greenhouse gas emission impacts of this proposal. The proponent has argued that the anaerobic digester is not to be considered as part of the gas plant. Even when the digester and processing facility are on the same proposal, the project begins with the sale of the biogas as it leaves the digester. This assertion may or may not comply with public service law and regulation, but for the purposes of environmental review, this is an impermissible segmentation of the whole project. Segmentation is defined as the division of the environmental review of an action so that various activities or stages are addressed as though they were independent, unrelated activities, needing individual determinations of significance, except in special circumstances, considering only a part or segment of an overall action is contrary to the intent of seeker. The information submitted to date in this proceeding is not sufficient for the ALJ to find that the project is in the public interest and thus fails to meet the minimum standards for the approval of a certificate of public convenience and necessity. This petition should be denied without prejudice. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Bob Wyman.
Yes, good afternoon. Bob Wyman here, that's W-Y-M-A-N. Good afternoon to you, Commissioner Berman, Judge Costello, and everyone else. I'd like to say I'm very concerned by this proposal that's before us now, primarily because the petition appears to me to be very incomplete. I've been involved in many rate cases and PSC proceedings, but I don't think I've ever before seen one so poorly documented with such an incomplete record. One key thing is that the CLCPA requires that in making its ruling, making the PSC's ruling, that the PSC must determine that this project is consistent with the goals for the greenhouse gas emission reduction set by the CLCPA. However, the existing petition does not appear to provide sufficient information to enable either the community or the PSC to make such a determination. The petition, I think, should be set aside until properly documented until we've got a better record. I've got a number of questions that I believe should be answered. First, an observation. Simply capturing and utilizing some methane does not necessarily result in a decrease in net emissions if one is capturing methane produced from something like an anaerobic digester that dramatically increases the quantity of methane which is produced. Also, it should be recognized that the simple act of injecting renewable natural gas into the pipeline system will result in a significant increase in emissions over those emissions which would be experienced if the gas were to be immediately converted to electricity on site. So even if the on-site emissions of the current system are to be ignored, okay, we still know that there will definitely be increased emissions due to the emissions from the transmission, distribution, and on-site utilization of that natural gas. Much evidence currently exists that such leakage is likely to be 3% or more of the total amount of gas which is injected into the system. That's all additive methane emissions. What I'd like to know is what emissions rate does Bluebird expect from the downstream systems into which they will be injecting? If they are making a proposal like this, they should be giving us at least their estimates of what those downstream emissions will be. They haven't done so. And will there be greater emissions from doing that injection than if they were to do nothing, essentially stay with where they are now? In order to allow us to evaluate that do nothing alternative, as is typical in environmental reviews, we should have estimates of the expected greenhouse gas emissions from operating the proposed facilities. We don't have them. We don't have any data on the characteristics of the existing anaerobic digesters or on what their emissions are or will be. Also, we don't know, there are important questions like, will the emissions from this system be monitored? Are they monitored now? Will they be monitored in the future? Will Bluebird be responsible to report the results of that monitoring to anyone? Can the PSC or some other agency require such monitoring for this system? I'm not quite sure I understand how it makes sense to allow a significant emission source to be put in place without requiring that at least report its emissions to someone. And if the emissions are being monitored, can Bluebird commit to keeping its emissions or its emissions rate below some quantity or rate? Also, if the existing digesters are no longer economic, what would be the expected emissions from non-digester manure management on these farms if this petition were to be denied, and if the farms decided not to continue with using their digesters to generate gas for electricity? I think that's important, once again, for evaluating the do nothing or the alternatives to this proposal. In almost all the gas proceedings I've been involved in the past, okay, it's been generally accepted that gas infrastructure investments are supposed to be evaluated after a benefit cost analysis. But no BCA has been offered in this case. We don't have the data needed to prepare one. Please note that the fact that there aren't any direct ratepayer costs here isn't the reason for not doing a BCA. While there may not be direct rate costs, such as costs from rates, there will still be environmental and climate costs, which are very real in terms of their impact on New York citizens. These costs should be compared using a BCA to the benefits which this project will provide to New York State citizens if there are any such benefits. I'd also like to ask, are there any estimates for the expected life of the assets that will be installed for this proposed system? And if the installed system proposed system does in fact increase emissions, are there any plans or requirements to prepare plans to retire these assets before 2050 when the CLCPA's goal of an 85% reduction must be met? Finally, I'd like to suggest that we should be informed of what, if any, costs will be borne by Corning Gas, since it's the where this stuff will be injected, and if any of those costs will be borne by Corning Gas's ratepayers. The proposal is completely silent on that subject. It is my hope that these questions and others can be addressed and answered during the consideration of this petition and before it is submitted to the PSC for the final order. I'm currently a registered party, and I look forward to getting answers to these questions in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Wyman.
Judge, before you go on, this is Commissioner Berman. I'm having some audio problems, so I'm going to go off and then come back on a different device. So hopefully that resolves it.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker will be Marianne Robinson. And if you are participating by telephone, we'd ask that you hit *3 on your telephone so that we can identify you and unmute your line. Okay, I am not seeing anybody. So I will go back to Marianne Robinson after we finish with our other speakers. So the next speaker would be Dimitri Tisnoy. And again, if you are using a telephone to participate, please hit *3. No, not seeing anybody. So I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who is Robert Sanch. We're just, okay, Mr. Sanch, your line has been unmuted. Mr. Sanch, can you hear us?
I can hear you, but
okay.
I did not mean to register to speak, so apologies for that.
Okay, that's no problem. All right, so what I'll do now is return to the people that I called, who I believe were participating by phone, and see if they are on the line. And the first person is Mary Finneran. And if you are on the line, please hit *3. Okay. Ann Finneran, if you were online, hit *3. Not seeing anyone. Okay.
Don't see anyone, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mary Ann Robinson. If you are participating by phone, please hit *3. Okay. And Dimitri Tisnoy, *3 if you're participating by telephone. Okay, I don't see anybody. So what I would like to do, since we had around, I'd say 12 speakers, if there is anyone else who's participating either electronically or by telephone, and I'll start with the electronic users. If you'd like to make a statement at this time, if you're an electronic user, you can see there are instructions on how you can participate. We would need you to use the raise hand function on WebEx, and then we'd be able to unmute your line and allow you to make a statement.
Your Honor, I do not see any raised hands.
All right, thank you. And then for people that are calling in, if there's anyone who at this time would like to make a statement and has not registered, you can make your statement now, and we'd ask that you hit *3 so that we can identify you. And
Again, Your Honor, I don't see anyone.
Okay, thank you. So we are now at the end of our public statement hearing, and I want to thank you for taking the time to attend and make your comments known for the commission. I remind you that you may submit comments throughout this proceeding by the other means that I discussed earlier and that are available in the notice of public statement hearing. I want to thank Commissioners Berman, Valesky, and Majori for attending the public statement hearing, and I would like to thank Jill Wasser and Xenia Vega for providing technical assistance. As indicated in the notice of public statement hearing and technical conference, we will be moving into a procedural conference. We're going to be moving into the procedural conference next. But what we're going to do is go off the record for around 5 minutes so that we give people who are not interested in the procedural conference time to disconnect. And we'll go off the record and come back on the record at, I'd say, 5:05. Okay, we're going to go off the record.
Okay, we are off the record.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judge. This is Commissioner Berman. I'm going to be getting off. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman.
Judge, I'll be getting off as well.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you, Judge. I will be getting off as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Judge. I'll be on a moment. I'll just take a moment to switch slides.
Okay, thank you.
Judge, should I end the live stream?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Should I end the YouTube live stream?
Yes, we're not going to live stream the procedural conference.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.